Today we're going to study an example of computational action. You might ask, what is computational action? Computational action is putting the power of computing to use in solving a socially important issue. Now, the example we're going to focus is how to end hunger. And if you do some research on this online, you're going to notice that the problem at the global level will look unsurmountable. The challenge is a huge one facing us as a generation, and this is something beyond the capability of any one individual. But what we're going to do is we're going to focus on a local version of this problem. We're going to focus on local examples of hunger and use MIT App Inventor to develop an application so that you can help alleviate this challenge at the local level. You're trying to resolve a challenge as big as this, it's probably a good idea to do some brainstorming to understand the issues better. So if you want to end world hunger, the big issues to tackle with here are that there are all these hungry people, but also there is a lot of excess food that is being wasted every day in restaurants, hotels, and local eateries. Now, at the global level, you're going to realize that this is too big a problem to solve, especially by an individual. But what you could do is you could focus on a local version of this problem and generate some ideas how you might be able to locally address this issue. So we're going to generate some ideas, and we will see how we can address these locally. Now, as you do your brainstorming, you might be able to break down the bigger challenge into smaller, more manageable challenges. For example, first of all, you might decide to identify in your community local eateries that have some food that might go to waste. There must be a lot of hotels, restaurants, other types of eateries for which this is true, and they might be willing to help you. You identify then what kind of food they have that goes to waste. Some of this food might be actually salvageable and servable to other people. And then you might be able to communicate with these eateries with the help of an app that you develop. And the rest of this video, we're going to focus on developing this app we're going to call EndHungerNow application with the help of MIT App Inventor. And once you have find out what kind of food and where it's being wasted, you could have some minivans go and collect the food from these eateries and be able to then bring the food to homeless shelters and other places where you can feed local hungry people. Now, this project, we're going to mostly focus in this video especially on the EndHungerNow application and how to develop this application, but there's no reason why this project cannot become part of a bigger social service project. Alrighty, now that we have a worthy cause and we have the idea that we're going to build an app to address this cause and to help with this cause, we can start this process. So I'm just going to remind you the mind mapping that we have done before. We talked about ending the world hunger and mentioned it's too big an issue to solve for a human being, but you could do it locally. And we identified some steps as part of a social service program that you might help alleviate this problem locally. Now we're going to focus on the EndHungerNow app. How are you able to build this app? We're going to focus on this process right now and create some sketches, rough drafts and sketches about that. So the first thing is I recommend is you use pencil paper. Give yourself a rough draft. Make a rough draft what you want your app to look like. So you might imagine the first screen of the app might have a logo. It might have it's a bunch of buttons, etc. Now, in the design that I came up with, a very simple design, I basically have the following scheme. In the opening screen, you have a request button, which brings you to a page where you can enter address, phone number, comments, etc., regarding the food pickup that you're trying to schedule. So this is what the clients of this app would use. They would enter the address, phone number, etc., for the food that they would like to be picked up, to be delivered to food shelters, etc. And then the second use of the app is administrative. You enter that with an admin password. But when you enter the admin region, the admin screen, there you can see the list of all these requests that has been made for a particular time. The time, address, phone number, comments, etc. Now, after you're done with the rough draft on a page, I recommend you either find a software, or you can start working directly in the App Inventor, MIT App Inventor environment. But you might start building with a little bit more sense what you are trying to build. So here we might have a logo, help stop hunger. You could make this easily using Photoshop or some other image processing software. Underneath that, we have our first button. The green button here is for the clients to use. They request excess food to be picked up. When they click on that, they come to a page where they are able to enter all the information. The address of the pickup, the phone number that is a contact number, some other comments such as what type of food you would like to have picked up, what time you would like the pickup to happen, etc. And then when you press this green button, it will send this data to the cloud. So this example we're going to develop today is an example of cloud computing. You would like multiple users to be able to access information across the internet. So what's going to happen is this information that the client typed is going to be sent to the cloud. And then when the administrator comes and uses their version of the app, they have to enter an administrative password. What's going to happen is once they enter the password correctly, they're going to be able to download from the cloud all of the requests. So here on February 25th, 2020, at this address, at this phone number, the following items, the foods are going to be picked up, and they give you a time of 5 o'clock for the pickup to happen, etc. So this is all the information that the team would need now to schedule the pickup, and using minivans, etc., bring the food to the food shelters and be able to feed the local hungry people. So this is an example how you could take a huge social problem, break it down into manageable parts, and then start envisioning an application that you can build in order to solve this problem. This is an example of computational action. You're using the power of computing to solve a social issue. Alrighty, now it is time for us to build this app in MIT App Inventor. What I want to do is to show you a possible final product. You could obviously make choices that you would like to make, but here is a possibility. So here is what our app's first screen could look like, with a logo, with button, administrative password area, etc. And then the second screen of the app would bring us to the place where the clients, the eateries, enter their information, address, phone number, comments for the pickup, etc. And this is where they can now press a button and schedule the pickup. And screen 3 is, let me show you screen 1 again, when the administrator enters their password and correctly enters their password, they're able to go to screen 3, which is basically where the requests are going to be listed. One thing I didn't mention before is you could also create here a button for deleting the database. So let's say at the end of the day, you have finished all of the visitations, you've gotten all the food, you don't want information to stay in the database anymore, you could create a button to delete that. We're going to talk about what the code, etc. might look like, but I just want to quickly show you what this might look like in real time. So here is the emulator. I'm going to quickly go back to the first screen. Here's what the emulator. The first screen, you as the client can click on this green button, and this is where you can enter addresses. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Abbott Avenue, Cambridge, Mass, etc. And you could enter some phone numbers. And then some information here, burgers at 9 o'clock. Okay, something like that. And when you have entered the information, you can press this button, which basically will now send the information that was typed to the cloud. Now, the administrator on their side, what they will do is they will enter the administrative password. So I'm just going to enter a password that I have chosen, but you could obviously decide your own. So once the admin correctly enters the password, they come to a page, and on this page there will be all the list of pickup requests that was made earlier. Now, when you are done and you want to delete the database, which is in the cloud, what you could do is you could press this button and it will clear everything. So it will give you a fresh beginning. Okay? Now, we're going to do this all together. So what I would like you to do is we're going to open a new MIT App Inventor project, and we will do that together in a minute. Now let's start slowly to build this app from scratch in MIT App Inventor. I'm going to do this as slow as I can. If you can follow me, wonderful. Otherwise, you could pause the video and create some things and then start the video again. So we go to My Projects, Start New Project. I'm going to call my app EndHungerNow. You could call it anything else you want. And this should bring you to a fresh page where you see, the palette of the MIT App Inventor, where all the components are displayed, the designer view, the components hierarchy, and the properties of the components. Okay, so let's start building this thing slowly. The first thing I want to do is I want to get my logo that I created in Photoshop displayed as my logo. So I'm going to so I dropped an image component, and I actually want everything to be nicely centered. So I go to the screen component, and where it says align horizontal, I make that center, align vertical, I make that center. And then for the image, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select an image that I have created in Photoshop. So let's see if I can find that. So I have here Help Stop Hunger banner that I've created, and this is going to be my logo. Okay. Now, as it is, it's going to be possibly quite huge. So what we need to do is we need to adjust that. So I'm going to just choose, I'm going to experiment. I don't quite know what I want. I'm going to try 200 pixels for width and then 200 pixels for height. And this looks reasonable to me. I can make this smaller in a minute if I need to. All right. So this is our logo. I would like my background color to be gray. So what I do is I click on the screen properties, and then where it says what is the background color, so let's find that. I'm going to choose it to be dark gray. I like that as a background. All right. Now what I do is I bring down a button. The button properties you can change here. I like my button shapes to be rounded, so I'm just going to select that option. I would like my button, the text to be request excess food pick up. Okay. So it's basically reminding us what this does. And then I would like my button color to be green, sort of like the green light. It's basically the signal to go. So that looks pretty good. Now what I would like to do is I would like to have a little horizontal arrangement, horizontal layout, in which I'm going to create the administrative interface. So what the administrative interface looks like is there is a button, the submit button for the administrator, and I might as well change that right now. I'm going to call this admin so that it's only for admin use. I'm going to again make it rounded, and I'm going to make this, let's color this one. Let's color this, how about orange? Okay, and then again in the user interface you're going to notice there is something called password text box. So this is where you could drop a component called the password text box. So you have the administrative button and then the password text box that goes with it. Okay, now a couple of things I'm going to change. The password text box, when you click on that, it should ask you what is the hint, like what should be written here. I'm gonna just say enter admin password. So this way when the user opens the app, there will be an indication, there'll be an instruction what to do there. Okay, and then the text we leave empty, and that should be fine. Okay, so this is what the first screen is going to look like. Alrighty, we have created our first screen. Now, if you remember the rough draft that we had created, when the user, the client presses the green request pickup button, they will come to a screen where they can write the information about the pickup. Okay, so that means we need to create a second screen. You do that by coming here, press the add screen button. By default it's called screen 2. I'm going to leave it as default, but if you want to call it something like the client screen or the pickup screen, something like that, you could do that. Screen 1 is the only screen you cannot give a name yourself. It is by default called screen 1. For our purposes, we don't need to change these screen names. So I'm going to create now a second screen, and let's see if it happened. Yep, we are now in the second screen. Alrighty, now let's start designing this second screen. The first thing I'm going to have is some kind of an instruction. So I'm going to have a label here. And again, let's change the screen properties, screen 2 properties. I would like my align horizontal to be centered, so I'm going to make it like that. I'm also going to make my screen color, again, dark gray, which means probably I'm going to have to change my label text color in a minute, but we'll fix that in a second. So I select my label, and then for the label, I would like to either give an instruction or say something like thank you. So I'm going to say thank you for combating hunger. Combating hunger. Okay? So that's the text. As you can see, it is not very visible because of the background color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the font and I'm going to change the text color from black to white so it is better visible. You might want to make things, for example, bold. You might want to change the font size to, let's try 20 if it's too big or not. Something like that. I'll just try 18. I feel something in between. So thank you for combating hunger. Okay, so this is where we thank our clients. Now we're going to need another label which indicates that this is where the user is going to be writing the address. So I write here address of pickup. Again, I'm going to color this white so we can see it. And underneath this label, I'm going to drag a text box component because this is where the user is going to enter the address of the pickup. The size of this text box is too small for an address. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the width to fill the parent. This will extend to the size of the screen. Okay. And you have other options there. You could make it multi-line if you feel the address needs a lot of lines to be described. I'm just going to leave it as is. And I'm going to do a similar thing for phone number. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to say phone number for the pickup. I'm going to color it white again. And I'm going to enter here a text box where the phone number can be written. Phone numbers don't tend to be that long, so I think this width is about right. And then lastly, we would like to have a comments area where the client can write what they would like to tell us about the pickup, what food there is, what time is the pickup, etc. So I'm going to call this comments for pickup. And again, color, I'm going to change it to white. And now, when I drag another text box, I want to make sure that this is not only as large as possible, so I'm going to fill the parent, but I'm going to select the multi-line option. There might be multiple lines of text that the client wants to enter. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a pixel height here. I mean, it's sort of eyeballing it. I don't know what's going to work, but I want it to be, let's say, about this high. Okay? So this is where the information is going to be written. Now we need a button where once the user is finished, they're going to be able to schedule the food pickup. So I'm going to call this request food pickup. I'm going to do my usual things. I'm going to get a round button shape. I would like the button color to be green, symbolic for to go. And let me just check that everything looks good. Yeah, so this I think could be our screen 2 where the client gives the food pickup information. We now have our two screens, screen 1 where you have your logo and the initial buttons, and then you have screen 2 where the client writes their information for food pickup. Now, when the administrator user of this app enters their password, they need to go to a separate screen where they can have access to administrative information, namely the food requests, the list of food requests. So for that, we're going to again add a screen. Screen 3 as a name is good enough for me, so I'm going to say OK. And then if we wait a second, we'll see a third screen. And in this screen, it's going to be a simple screen. We're going to have only a few things. First, we're going to have a list view. I will explain later what list view is. It basically is a nice interface where you could display, in this case, the food requests, food pickup requests. So I dragged and dropped it. I'm going to make its height to be, let's actually fill the parent for both of them. Fill the parent for both width and height. I don't mind taking this much space because the only other thing I'm going to need, which I'm going to drag and drop right now, is a button. And let's actually change the screen 3 property so that everything is aligned horizontally at the center. I should also quickly, in screen 3, color the background to be dark gray. That's the color that I've been using all over. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this button. I'm going to call this button delete data base. Okay, and this will basically delete the information stored in the cloud. I want again the shape to be rounded. I'm going to give it a color of red just to warn that it is a sort of an irreversible process. People should use this with care. It will delete all the information that is in the database. Okay. Alrighty, now we have our 3 screens. Screen 1, which is the sort of the welcoming screen. Screen 2 for the client. Screen 3 for the administrator. But what you're going to notice is none of these screens are at this point functional. So if I try to press any of these buttons, nothing will happen because I haven't given it behavior yet. Our blocks region, as you click on that, you're going to notice there's no code. So there's no behavior, and we are about to do that in a minute. Thank you. Now it is time to give behavior to our components. When you press this button currently, nothing will happen because there is absolutely no code, no place where the behavior is defined. So that's what we're going to do right now. Before we do that, I just want to tell you about a good habit in MIT App Inventor. So if you look at this components hierarchy here, you're going to notice that all of the components here are given default names, button 1, button 2, etc. When you arrive at the blocks region and you're about to write some code, because button 1 and button 2 is not descriptive, you're going to get confused which one does what. So it is a great habit, have this habit early on, to actually rename your components so that they're meaningful and they carry information. So I'm just going to start with our image here. I'm going to name this, for example, the logo image. So whatever it is, I'm going to describe it in the first part. It's a logo. And then the second part has to be the name of the component so that you remember its properties and capabilities in a minute. So I call this the logo image. The first button here, I'm going to rename this request pick up. Again, I end with the component name button. Request pickup button. Okay. Horizontal arrangement doesn't need to have a special name. However, button 2 here, it's an administrative button, so I'm going to call this admin, again, component name button. And then the password text box is pretty clear what the password text box is, so we don't need to rename that. Okay. Now let's go to the blocks editor here, and you're going to notice our name changes have been indicated here, and this is going to be very helpful to us in a minute. Now let's think about this logically. What should happen? When I am in this screen and I press the request button, the green button, let's decide what should happen. When I press so I go to the request pickup button, and the first event handler there is when request pickup button is clicked, it tells us, it basically gives us a chance to describe what needs to happen. Well, all that needs to happen is you have to open another screen called screen 2. So for that, you go to control. These are the prefabricated blocks for you. If you go to control, one of the options there is open another screen with screen name. And what we need to do is we go to the text blocks. The first one is an empty string where we can write the exact name of the screen. It is called screen 2. If you wrote this with spaces or with you forget the capitalization, etc., it will not work. It has to be the exact same name as the name of the screen. So when you press the request pickup button, all that should happen is it brings you to another screen called screen 2. All right. Now, a similar thing is true for the administrative button. So when you click the administrative button, there's a little bit of trick here because only if the password entered is correct, you should go to screen 3. So for that, we need what is called a conditional. It's called an if-then block. All right. So what should happen if so I'm going to put an equal sign. If the password text box text, so if the password text box text, meaning whatever was entered by the admin into the password text box, if it is equal to a particular password, and here you could be creative, you could call it whatever you want. I'm going to call it password is 12345. Okay, so if the password text box text is equal to 12345, then it should open another screen. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select this, which I already created, and I'm going to copy and paste it. I did Control C, Control V, and all I have to do is now change the name of the screen from screen 2 to screen 3. Okay? So here we have a conditional opening of screen 3. You might wonder, why isn't there an else option here? Because there's also an if then else conditional. If the password entered is wrong, I don't want to do anything. I just want basically to wait until the correct password is entered and the button is clicked. All right. So it might be a good idea to test these. So let's bring about our emulator to see if it is still functional. I might need to refresh the companion screen. So I'm going to go to that. Let's test this. If I press the request button, it brings me correctly to the second screen. Now let's go back to the first screen again. And let's see what happens. Let me enter a wrong password. Okay, so I'm going to enter 123 as a password. When I hit admin, nothing happens. Okay, but imagine that now I enter 12345, which was my password. When I click the admin button, it brings me to screen 3, where there is the list view and the database. Okay, So believe it or not, the screen one's coding is only this much. There's not much else that you need to do. Now it is time to code screen two's behavior. So remember, this is where the client, the eateries, will enter their information, address, phone number, comments, etc. Now, there are several components that we already created here, which we're going to rename them to for clarity in a minute. But there are two components that I did not include yet, so I'm going to do that right now. The first thing I want to do is I want to drop a clock as a component. So let's go and find sensors. Clock is a sensor component. I'm going to select clock, drop and drag, and you're going to notice it adds up on the hierarchy, but it doesn't show up anywhere on the interface because it is what is called a non-visible component. Now, you might wonder why I need a clock. What I'm going to do is I'm going to capture the information, the time information when this, when the client fills all of this questionnaire here, so that we'll have a sense when was the pickup order, when was the pickup request placed. Okay, you could ask this information to the user, but that's needless waste of their time because the mobile app will already have a way of keeping track of time itself. So I have the clock. Now, even more importantly, I need another component called CloudDB. This component, again, a non-visible component, is going to allow this information that is entered to be sent to the cloud when the client presses the green button here. Okay, we'll talk about the details about how CloudDB works in a second, but all you need to know is it is basically where in a non-local fashion, so it's not going to be stored on the user's mobile app itself, but it's going to be sent somewhere in the what we call the cloud, and once all the information is in the cloud, the administrator can pick that information and act accordingly. Okay, so I think we have all the information. Now, again, good habit is we should label things properly. So the first label, I'm going to call this thank you label. Remember, I give it a descriptive name and then end with the component name, thank you label. The second one, I'm going to call it the address label. That's what it is. Okay. The first text box, I'm going to call it address text box. The third label is the phone number label, so I'm going to call that phone number label. The second text box is the phone number text box, so I'm going to enter that. Okay. And then the fourth label is where you have the comments, so this is called the comments label. And then I'm going to call this comments text box, comments text box. And then the button is important. We're going to call this the request food pickup. Again, I end with the button, with the component name button, request food pickup button. So when it's coding time, I'm not puzzled what each of these components are really doing. Okay, so we have properly named our components. Now what we could do is we can go to the blocks, and now we're going to describe what happens. Now the user is going to enter their information at their leisure. We have no control over that. The only thing that we have to keep track of is when the green button is picked, what should happen. That's the only thing that we need to keep track of. So that's what we're going to do. So we find where the button is. I click on the component, and these are all the blocks associated with that particular component. So here's an event handler which says when the request food pickup button is clicked, blah, 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 this is what should happen. Now let's think about what should happen. The information stored should be sent to the cloud. So first of all, let us create a list where we store all the information that the user has typed. So I'm going to make a list. If you look at here, there is 1, 2, 3 informations here. And in addition to these 3 informations here, there's also the clock information. So I'm going to create a list with 4 sockets, meaning 4 entries. Okay. The first one is, I'll leave that empty for a second because it's a little bit harder to explain. But let's get the, from the address text box, let's get the address text box text. So that's the first information we're going to be sending to the cloud. The second one is the phone number text box. So from there, we're going to get that text. And the last one is from the comments text box. We're going to get the text from the comments text box. And we're going to add that as the 4th item of the of this list. Now, for clocks are a little bit potentially confusing. Not really, but I'm just going to try to walk this through with you. What we would like to have is the information, how to store the time. So I'm going to select the format that shows like this. It shows us the month, the date, and the year, so that we have some sense of on what day was this request made. You could be more specific and enter hours, minutes, seconds, etc. I don't need to be that precise. I'm going to grab this format. But then we need to grab the instance of time. And that you find at the bottom. It's not obvious at all. It's called clocks now. The instance is called now. So when the button is pressed, at that instant, I want to get the time in this format. So this is how I'm going to store things in my list. First the time, then the address, then the phone number, then the comments. Okay? Now, where is this going to go? Well, this is going to go into the cloud. And in the cloud blocks, you're going to notice one of the options is append value to list. So you can imagine many E3s are sending their requests, and we just want to have this particular request to be added to the list. Now, in CloudDB, you store things by their tags. These are kind of like the variable names, if you will. I'm just going to have a very simple tag name. Go to the text blocks. I'm just going to call this food data. Okay? You could call it anything you want, but I would like the information that the client enters to be sent to the cloud with a tag called food data, and whatever other clients are sending is going to be added to that ongoing list of requests. It is customary when you're done with an information, it's customary to clean up the entries of the text boxes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the address text box options here, and one of the options is set address text box to. I'm going to put there an empty string which tells us basically that it was cleaned. So when the user enters their information and presses the button, that text box should be cleaned. And you're going to notice that there are other options here. So what I could do is I can copy, paste twice. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to change now this to phone number text box. and the comments text box. So all of these will be cleared. And what should probably happen once this information is sent to the cloud and the entries are cleared, you should return to screen one. So we use something that we have done before. So we're going to say, open another screen called screen one. So when the data has been entered and sent to the cloud, we're basically saying, go back to the welcoming screen in case the user wants to enter more information. Okay? Alrighty, wow, this was hard. This is probably the hardest part of the project so far. The rest I feel is going to be easier, but I hope this makes sense to you. We collected the information that the user entered. We grabbed the time from the mobile phone. We made a list out of these informations and stored them under a tag called food data and sent it to the cloud. Okay? Alrighty, that concludes the coding for screen number 2. Now we're going to code the behavior for screen 3. Remember, when the administrator enters their password correctly and presses the admin button, screen 1 leads to screen 3. And what screen 3 is, it basically has a list view, which we're going to discuss in a second, and a delete database button. All right? So let us first of all rename our components so that it makes some sense. List view, you could probably leave it as it is. We will not get confused by that. But button 1, let's rename it to say delete, I'm going to call it DB for database, delete DB button, so that I will remember that it is a delete database button. Okay? So I've renamed my components. Now let's think what should happen. So when the screen 3 initializes, meaning screen 1 sends us to screen 3, what should happen is there should be a request made to the CloudDB to send all the existing information there. Okay? Now, one thing you're going to notice is in this screen 3, we do not yet have access to CloudDB. Okay? So what we should do immediately before we forget is we go again to the storage components here, grab and drop and drag a CloudDB component. Now, this CloudDB, even though it is in different screens, it is the exact same CloudDB access that we have in screen 2. In screen 2, let me show you what it looks like. You have a CloudDB component, and you might wonder, well, how do we know CloudDB in screen 2 is the same as CloudDB in screen 3? This is one of the properties of MIT App Inventor, that the CloudDB component is shared between the screens. It is referring to the same storage space. This is where, by the way, the token, if you are into more technicality, this is where the token is specified. So it's not sending you to another part of the cloud. It's going to the same exact location. Okay? Alrighty, now let's start the coding for screen 3. So when the screen 3 is initialized, okay, so when screen 3 is initialized, what we would like to do is we would like to send a request to CloudDB. It's a get value request. We're going to say, CloudDB, please get me the information, get me the value that is stored under the tag food data. You might remember this was the name we gave earlier to our tag. Now, it's always going to ask you, what should I do if there's no value there? Well, normally lists are going to be stored under the tag food data. So if there's nothing there, all I should return is an empty list. Okay? So here I'm making a request to get all the existing data from the cloud. Now, this event is going to send a request to the cloud, and the cloud is going to look for this tag, and what's going to happen is it's going to return with a got value event. So it's going to tell you, oh, I got the value that you were asking for. So when the got value event happens, the question is what should happen? What should happen is we should set the list view elements. So we find the elements options, the set list view elements to the value that was returned from the cloud. Okay, and remember, this is going to be a list of lists. It's going to be a list of all the requests individual client eateries have entered. Right? So this is what should happen. You should set the elements of the list view. So all these parts of the list view are going to be filled with data coming from the cloud. All right? Now, sometimes the following situation is going to happen. The admin is already, in the admin window, in the admin screen. They're examining the existing requests for food pickup. What's going to happen is at that instant, another client out there somewhere is going to request their own food pickup. And what should happen is, as they send this information to the cloud needs to let the admin know, oh, you have to now update your screen because new data arrived. Okay? So CloudDB is very clever for that. There is something called data change event handler. So when the data in the cloud has changed, what should happen is basically identical to this that we have done before. I'm going to copy and paste here. What should happen is the new value, just technically I'm going to get rid of this one, but it's the same thing. I'm going to basically now get the new value and set it to the list view elements. So this will basically refresh the page, and the new information is going to be displayed. Lastly, we need to figure out what to do with the delete database button. When that button is clicked, what should happen is we should send a request to the CloudDB to clear the basically clear all the values under the tag food data. So we're going to request when the admin requests the data to be cleared, we're going to go to the cloud, found the tag food data, and we're going to clear all the information under that tag. Okay? Now, it's also a good idea to do the following. I'm going to get rid of this thing here. Now, the list view elements need to be assigned an empty list so that the list view itself will clear. It will basically show us empty data. There should not be anything after the clear database button has been pressed. Alrighty, believe it or not, we are basically done. We have now created all the code that gives behavior to our screens. Alrighty, now it is time to test our app. You have created an app with a graphical user interface, multiple screens. There is code for each of these screens' behavior. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to test. You can do the testing by going to Connect and selecting either the AI Companion or the emulator. It is actually also recommended, because you really want to be able to test this with multiple mobile apps representing multiple clients, each of them entering their own data, individually they are sending their data to the cloud, and then a separate mobile app where the admin is checking the results. You really need to actually do what is called a build. You make a build by selecting the first option here, for example, or the second option, but this will create a QR code which you could then scan with your App Inventor AI companion, and that way multiple mobile phones or tablets can have this app that you developed. For right now, all I'm going to do is I'm going to basically keep working with the emulator that I have because I'm just trying to demonstrate the basic idea here. I'm going to refresh the screen. I'm going to bring the emulator to the front. So let's try if the app works correctly. I click on the request information, request food pickup button. Here there's some information I can enter. So I'm going to say, my address is 555 Bolton Street, Arlington, Mass 02474. Here you can enter again a fictitious phone number, 617-222-3333, and then information here, something like I have pastries to be pick up, so pick up at 9 p.m. So let's say this is the information I enter. Now I will request a food pickup. So I'm going to press the green button. When I do that, it brings me to the welcome page again. Before I pretend to be the administrator, what I want to do is I want to enter one more. So we have a variety here. I'm going to enter another address, 77 Abbott Avenue, Boston, Mass. 02140. Again, a fictitious phone number, 555-9999. And this time, let's say we have soup. We can say pickup at 7 p.m. Okay. Now, let me also send this information to the cloud. Brings me to the first page. Now, let's say the admin is now using their phone, and remember the password we hard-coded was 12345. By the way, you could have chosen any number that you wanted, but this is the number that I chose. When you press the admin button, what we should see is now we are in screen 3, and here is how the list view displays the requests already made. It gives us a timestamp. It says February 26, 2020, at this address in Arlington, at this phone number, there are pastries to be picked up at 9 o'clock. Okay? And the second request also is written here. The admin now, if he is part of, or he or she is part of a social service project, might now call their team to arrange a pick up with a minivan or something like that, go to these addresses at the given times, pick up the food, and deliver the food that was picked up to some local shelters where the hungry people could be fed. Now, let's say you're done. As the admin, what you could do, and let's test that, you could now delete the database. When you click, as you notice, because we are clearing the database, the list view with an empty list, all the data should be gone. Alrighty, so this concludes the testing of the app on this video tutorial. The correct way to properly do the testing, remember, is to make a build. So I'm going to quickly show you what this would look like. You go to the build server. It's going to take a few seconds for it to create a QR code. And what you would then do is go to your mobile phone's AI2 companion which you should have. And what you would do is you would scan the QR code that is being created uh, with the AI tool companion. It is always important to be up to date with your companion. There are many releases that are being made. Some of them are major bug fixes. But now, in a second, hopefully we should see a QR code. And when the QR code is ready, what you could now do is hold your mobile phone with the AI2 companion activated. You will be able to screen this QR code, and you'll be able to have multiple tablets or mobile phones scan this QR code. And what they should be able to do is independently send information to the cloud, and then an admin mobile phone can independently download the information from the cloud and access the requests that were made. Alrighty, well done, well done. Now what I would like to quickly do is recap what we have been discussing. So first we talked about finding a worthy goal, something socially important. We picked the example of ending world hunger. And we talked about the really unsurmountability of such an enormous task and the need to make this a local issue, address the local issue. One thing I mentioned earlier is I showed you this diagram. This diagram is an example of what is called mind mapping, and you can find mind map software online. The version that I'm using right now is called MindMeister. It's a free software. It looks like a nice and easy one to use. But we made a mind map in which we discussed we can't end world hunger ourselves, but we could try to end local hunger. And we talked about some steps, and then we focused on how you can build an EndHungerNow app in MIT App Inventor that will allow you to address this issue. We created our graphical user interface. We created our client interface and the admin interface. And then we created the blocks that give behavior to this interface. Okay? And as you can see, you don't have to do a lot of very complicated coding to come up with a meaningful application. Our application will do the job, even though it is pretty simple. Of course, you could expand this project to be more interesting, more engaging, more powerful. One idea that I will toss out there is, for example, you could add maps to your app, where, for example, when the admin goes to learn about the requests that are being made, maybe on the map you see a display of the locations of where the food is going to be picked up. Okay, so it is a interesting endeavor to try to expand an application once you have created that. But this is what I would call, what you're seeing right now is what I would call a minimum viable product. This is in itself, it will work, it will do the job. You could always add bells and whistles to it to make it more powerful, more interesting. Okay? So in this video, we have seen an example of computational action, which means using the power of computing, in this case, mobile computing, to do something socially meaningful to help alleviate some kind of a social challenge. I hope you enjoyed it. We really look forward to seeing your products, and I would like to encourage you to look at the MIT App Inventor main page. So I'm going to try to show you here. If you go to appinventor.mit.edu, you're going to see there a main page, and there you can see all kinds of interesting things like resources where you could get access to tutorials. You could get information about other things. You could get also information about what is called App of the Month. What is wonderful about App of the Month is you could actually look at past winners, and almost all of these are examples of computational action. They will solve some kind of a community problem. Some of them are actually games, so they're also fun to look at. But you might learn how others before you have done their coding to be able to achieve a goal that they have set for themselves. Okay, there's some really fabulous ones. This year we have only a few so far, but you could access past year's winners. So this goes all the way back 5 years to 2015, and I'm sure you'll find some very exciting examples to use as models, and you could use these ideas to build your own. And I also would like to encourage you to make your own submission. So you could submit your app to the App of the Month, where you enter your information, and it is quite fantastic when you become an App of the Month winner. You're celebrated in the social media, and it is quite a big deal, and it's a fun thing to achieve. Alrighty, it's been my pleasure as part of the MIT App Inventor team to work with you. We look forward to seeing the wonderful things that you guys will create. Take care.